Syria is a mess, and it is no wonder given its history, which is also a mess. Syria gained independence as a parliamentary republic in October of 1945. What followed was a series of coups. In all, between 1949 and 1970, Syria had 17 different leaders. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad came into power in 2000 following the death of his father, Hafez al-Assad, who had ruled from 1971. And then in late 2010 came the Arab Spring. These uprisings came after decades of authoritarian rule in the Mideast.
It was frustration at Tunisia's youth unemployment that started it all. When 23-year-old fruit vendor Mohamed Bouazizi set fire to himself, it sparked an unprecedented wave of protests that would transform the region. March, and in Syria, protests are sparked by the arrest of several teenagers in Daraa who daubed walls with anti-regime slogans. Many of those who continue to demonstrate are young and out of work, risking their lives day after day in the hopes of obtaining a better future.
Protests have spread across Syria after forces loyal to the ruling Assad family killed dozens of demonstrators in the south.
The Syrian rebels have been begging for the United States to get more engaged in this war.
There were Republicans and Democrats beginning in 2011 who all said, if we don't attend to Syria, more people will die, it will be more sectarian, it'll destabilize the neighborhood, and it will open the door for al-Qaeda. And that is exactly what has happened. So
the West has combined maximalist, uncompromising rhetoric with minimalist, ineffective efforts.
The U.S. is making a stunning change to one of its central efforts to stop ISIS in Syria. It's suspending its $500 million program to train up to 5,000 rebel fighters each year. The program fell far short of its goals.
Can you tell us what the total number of trained fighters remains?
It's a small number. The ones that are in the fight, we're talking four or five.
Who is America for in this struggle? We know whom it's against, the Assad regime, also the regime's principal opponent, ISIS, also all the other jihadi groups fighting in Syria, like Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate, and Ahrar al-Sham, perhaps the largest one besides ISIS. Oh, and it's also opposed to the Hezbollah forces and the Iranian advisors who have been supporting the Syrian government. The United States, by contrast, is closely allied with the Iraqi government in its fight against militant Sunnis in that country, but it finds itself on the same side of these same militant Sunnis just across the border in Syria as they battle the Assad regime. Washington does have some group setbacks, but if you consider the major groups vying for control of Damascus, the United States is against almost all of them, which makes for moral clarity but strategic incoherence.
Again today to try to stop a new war in the Middle East before it starts. The last thing the people of Syria need, the last thing the people of the United States need is a new bombing missile war against their country.
The war in Syria is complicated with lots of moving parts. The American strategic interest is the elimination of ISIS and the removal of Assad. It is an ugly conflict with ISIS beheadings and Syrian use of chemical weapons.
Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas. It is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike.
Russia proposed on Monday that Syria surrender control over its chemical weapons to the international community for its eventual dismantling to avoid a U.S. military strike.
This brings Russia directly into the conflict, supporting Syria. Why do the Russians choose to become engaged in this mess? Russia is a neighbor to Syria. We are not. Russia has a strategic interest in Syria. We do not. Russia has a military base in Syria. We do not. Assad has been losing ground to ISIS and to the rebels. So in September of 2015, Russia intervened.
The situation in Syria went from bad to worse this week. President Obama gave up on his program to train a new rebel army to take on the Assad regime. Russia escalated its offensive against the Assad opposition, including launching cruise missiles from almost 1,000 miles away. And ISIS moved to fill the vacuum created by the Russian attacks on the rival insurgents.
In order to defeat ISIS, it is generally agreed that air power is necessary but not sufficient.
U.S. warplanes have been bombing ISIS
There will be a
targets
requirement for
some
ground
members.
troops.
I do not foresee a scenario in which boots on the ground in Syria, American boots on the ground in Syria, would not only be good for America, but also would be good for Syria.
Neither the United States nor Russia is willing to introduce ground troops into the fight. However, and it is a big however, Russia can utilize Syrian ground troops to supplement its air campaign. The United States has no such option and has been unsuccessful in turning the Syrian rebels into a competent fighting force. The choice seems to be to leave Assad in power while the Russians eliminate ISIS, which they can do because they have the combination of Russian military aircraft and Syrian ground troops. We should let the Russians destroy ISIS and we'll deal with Assad later. And as an extra benefit, this whole thing could really hurt the Russians.
It is not as brilliant as it's being made out. It's a desperate effort to shore up one of the Kremlin's only foreign allies, and it risks making Russia the great Satan in the eyes of jihadis everywhere.
So in summary, ISIS is eliminated without risking any American life. And it is Russians, instead of Americans, put in harm's way. And we avoid participation in another Middle East quagmire.